What happens when a graceful black woman is thrown out of an airport for simply helping school children? Staff thought she was just another passenger, until they found out who she's married to. What happened next turned the entire airport upside down. It was one of those cool Atlanta mornings, sky gray, air sharp, and coffee extra necessary. Sandra Brooks stepped out of her car with the kind of grace that doesn't ask permission. Long coat, polished boots, that calm, commanding presence that comes from a life of doing for others and asking little in return. She wasn't there for herself. She was there for them. 25 middle schoolers from underfunded schools on their way to DC for the first time in their lives. She'd helped build the program, our future in our hands. And now, here she was, bright and early, making sure every kid had their ticket, their ID, and just enough courage to board that plane without looking back. "Remember," she told them, smoothing one girl's collar, "you belong up there, just like anybody else." Then she walked to the information desk, hoping to confirm whether she could escort the group to the gate. What she got instead was a reminder: the rules aren't the same when your skin says something else. David. That was his name. White guy. Looked like he'd been doing the bare minimum since '97. The second he laid eyes on her, his whole vibe shifted, like she'd walked in tracking mud. "You can't be in this area," he said flatly, not even bothering to ask what she needed. Sandra smiled, held up her paperwork. "I'm with the student group. I'm cleared to—" He cut her off with a button press. "Security, no questions, no reading, just no." "Please leave before this becomes a problem," he added, like she was the issue. Next thing she knew, 2 security guards flanked her. No greetings, no listening. Just that same look, the one that says, "We've already made up our minds." "I'm not doing anything wrong," Sandra told them carefully. "These kids, ma'am, either step out voluntarily or we'll call the police." One guard even reached for her arm. She stepped back. "Don't touch me. I have every right to be here." But rights don't mean much when folks decide you don't deserve them. Within minutes, Sandra was standing outside the terminal, not as a threat, not as a criminal, but as a black woman who had the nerve to show up where she was needed. Behind her, the kids looked confused, parents frustrated, phones recorded, and inside, David was probably already bragging about how he handled a situation. Sandra? She stood in that cold air, more steady than mad, for now, but deep down she knew this wasn't some misunderstanding. This was what too many of us live with every day, being seen as less than, right in the middle of doing good. And this was only the beginning. Sandra stood just outside the glass doors of the terminal, still like a stone that's seen too many waves crash over it and refuses to move. Her breath was steady, but her spirit lit. Not by anger, no, by something deeper, purpose. Through the crowd, Mario, one of the kids' dads, pushed his way toward her. He held up his phone like it was proof in a courtroom. "This is madness," he said, shaking his head. "I caught the whole thing. I'm putting it online now." Sandra looked at him with that calm fire in her eyes. "Not for revenge, Mario," she said, voice low but solid. "For the kids. They need to know this isn't normal. They need to know it's not okay." By the time the first cup of coffee hit the break room back inside, the video was already flying across the internet. 10,000 views, then 20, then 50. People were commenting, resharing, tagging every news outlet you could name. This happened in 2025? She's dignified, calm, and they threw her out like she broke a law. What protocol says remove the black woman first and ask questions never? Meanwhile, inside the airport, the walls were starting to sweat. At the check-in desk, Leslie, no, the young intern with more sense than the whole management team combined, turned to David. Her voice trembled just a little, but her words were clear. "Did you see the video?" She didn't even raise her voice. She was just trying to help those kids. David didn't look up from his keyboard. "Not your concern. We followed protocol." Oh, protocol. That magical word that gets used every time someone wants to hide behind a rulebook instead of taking responsibility. Leslie hesitated. "Yeah, well, protocol didn't look very human on camera." Calls started flooding into the customer service line. Emails pinged. Internal complaints were suddenly everyone's concern. Still outside, Sandra did what black women do best when the world tries to silence them. She kept showing up. She didn't pack up, didn't cry. She sat down on the metal bench just outside the terminal, crossed one leg over the other, and opened her mouth to the first journalist who approached. She wasn't chasing attention. She was the attention. And then, from the side entrance, a woman in a navy blue blazer approached, crisp, corporate, carrying that kind of folder that says, "I was told to handle this now." "Mrs. Brooks," she asked, "I'm with Passenger Advocacy Services. We received word that you may have been subjected to unfair treatment. We'd like to formally hear your side of the story." Sandra looked up, not angry, not flustered, ready. "I don't want sympathy," she said. "What I want is for y'all to take a hard look at how you treat people who don't look like you. Because this isn't just about me. This happens every day, just not always on camera." The woman blinked, nodded, scribbled, but that was already too late. The story had legs, and it was running full speed. Within hours, every local news outlet had a headline. "Black woman escorted out of Atlanta airport while helping students." Camera crews rolled up. Reporters circled. Microphones reached for Sandra like she was testifying before the nation, because, in a way, she was. Inside, David was nowhere to be seen. Outside, Sandra was standing taller than ever. The morning after the storm didn't start quietly. Phones buzzed across every desk in the Atlanta airport before sunrise. Emails flew like loose papers in the wind. Somebody's hands were shaking while pouring their first cup of coffee, and on every TV screen in every break room, a headline that turned the whole place inside out. FAA launches investigation after black volunteer escorted out of airport. Wife of FAA director removed while assisting school children. And then came the statement. Short, direct, unapologetically clear. The Federal Aviation Administration is actively investigating the incident at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport involving the wrongful removal of a passenger. We are especially concerned given the passenger's respected role in the aviation community, and her connection as the spouse of FAA Director Charles Brooks. Boom! That was the sound of every jaw in the airport lobby hitting the tile at once. David? Remember him? Mr. Protocol himself? He turned pale enough to match the copy paper he used to ignore people's rights. The color drained from his face like someone pulled the plug. Across the office, his manager, who had backed him the day before with a lazy shrug, now hissed across the floor. "You said she was acting suspicious. You didn't mention she was married to the head of the FAA." "Oh, but Sandra? She didn't need titles to stand tall. She didn't need a powerful husband to have worth. But now the whole system was looking in her direction. And for once, they were being forced to see her. She was invited back into the building. This time, not as a problem, not as a risk, but as a guest of honor. Funny how fast the narrative flips when the cameras are rolling and the stakes get federal. Cameras clicked. Reporters swarmed. Airport execs shook her hand like they suddenly discovered manners. Someone even offered her a quiet settlement, a check, a formality. But Sandra? She didn't come for hush money. "I don't need your money," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "I need you to make sure the next woman who looks like me doesn't get walked out like a criminal for helping children get to a better future." No shouting, no drama, just the truth, delivered like only a woman who's lived it can. And then, later that day, the FAA held a press conference. Not a tweet, not a PR blurb, a press conference. Charles Brooks, the director himself, tall, measured, a man who had weathered more than a few storms, stepped up to the podium. His voice never wavered. "My wife experienced what millions of black Americans experience quietly, every day. This time, it was on camera. That's the only difference. It is unacceptable. And as long as I'm in this role, we're going to address the way people are treated in our airports, not just when someone's watching, but every single time." Beside him stood Sandra, holding his hand, not because she needed protection, but because she had nothing to hide. Her eyes, unshaken. Her posture, unapologetic. She didn't just survive the moment, she redefined it. She turned humiliation into visibility, disrespect into accountability. A silent shove into a national conversation. And though the bruise of that morning would linger in ways the world wouldn't see, her name was no longer just in the system. It was in the story. Sandra Brooks didn't ask for power, but that morning, power started speaking her language.